Welcome to a bonus edition of Shop Talk Live. On today's show, we have our very own Mike Pekovich interviewing furniture maker and author of The Craft of Veneering, Craig Thibodeau. When I sat down to think about interviewing Craig Thibodeau and what questions I wanted to ask him, I realized that I really just wanted to ask Craig the questions that Mike wanted to ask Craig. And I thought it'd just be a lot easier if Mike interviewed Craig then. I think everybody's going to learn something from Craig today. I know I did, and I'm pretty sure Mike did as well. But before we get started, I want to let everyone know about a series that we have on the website called The 7 Questions. You can head on over to findwoodworking.com/7 questions. Basically, we set up a camera and ask the authors that we're working with anything from what's your favorite type of wood to work with to if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently? The answers are all over the place. I've been surprised by at least 2 answers in each and every video, and these are authors that I thought I knew pretty well. So if you enjoy interviews, these videos are a great way of getting to know some of your favorite furniture makers a little bit better. All right, let's get to the reason why you're here, and that's for Mike Pekovich's interview of Craig Thibodeau.
Hey, I'm Mike Pekovich on a special edition of, what's the name of our podcast?
Shop Talk Live.
Shop Talk Live. Obviously, I'm not Ben Strano. I'm filling in for Ben. I'm here with a really cool person, great furniture maker, and I'm really excited to have a chance to talk with them. Craig Thibodeau, good morning. I hope this isn't too early for you.
Good morning, Mike. No, this is perfect. I'm glad to talk to you.
Good deal. So for those of you who are not familiar with Craig's name, Craig is he's an expert furniture maker, just is amazing in his veneering and marquetry work, along with some really other fun stuff he's doing I want to talk about later. He's a longtime author for Fine Woodworking. That's where I'm familiar with you, Craig, and we were talking earlier about how this was actually the first time we spoke semi-in person, so that's really cool. Craig is also the author of a great book that just came out called The Craft of Veneering. I definitely want to ask you some questions about that. But before we get going, I'd like you to back up and just have you tell me a little bit about your background. How'd you get interested in woodworking, and sort of how did you end up doing the kind of stuff that you're doing today?
Okay. I think I took the same path most people take in that I started working out of a garage sort of in evenings and weekends. Uh-huh. Mostly while I was going to college, it was sort of something to break up the time.
What were you studying? What were you studying in college? Sorry.
Mechanical engineering.
Okay.
I did product design work afterwards for quite a while, which tied in and sort of helped my learning curve with CAD quite a bit. But I did the woodworking on the side just as a break from school, and then once I started working as a break from work to relax in the evenings and weekends. We had a shop at the house, and then every time we moved, we had another shop.
Cool.
Either in a storage unit sometimes or a garage shop, kind of depended. And it just sort of grew naturally on its own. It was little pieces just for friends and family initially, like everybody does, really.
Yep.
And then people started seeing some of the pieces I was doing for shows, and then it grew and grew. And as the show publicity picked up, more work sold, and it eventually became more work doing furniture than there was engineering. So it kind of became a natural switch to go from one to the other.
Oh, cool. Was that a big leap for you to go from sort of woodworking part-time, bringing in extra money, to, yikes, I'm a professional woodworker now?
Not really. By that time, I was doing mostly consulting with the engineering. It was freelance design work, so it wasn't really a job, a 9-to-5 job anymore anyways.
Okay.
So it was sort of natural to switch from one to the other. And for the first couple of years, I kept doing some of the freelance work anyways, just to bring in extra income because it pays significantly better than furniture making.
Sure, yes.
Like everything does.
Unfortunately, many things do. Yeah, so the work you're doing now, it's heavily on the side of veneering and marquetry, and also I guess I would kind of call it mechanical work as well. The first work you were doing, was it solid wood, joiner, planer, table saw kind of stuff, or were you interested in veneer work from the very beginning?
No, I started like most people doing, Krenov and Nakashima, attempts at knockoffs of their work just to learn the skills.
Yep.
And veneer just sort of very gradually came in a little bit at a time. I had a couple clients early on that were interested in pieces with more figure and color than I could get in solid wood, and that sort of necessitated the move into veneering.
Okay.
And then that just kind of grew as I realized there was so much more potential for decorative work with veneer than there was for solid wood.
Okay. That does seem like a bit of a slippery slope where, sorry, once you do get into veneering and such, it seems like the people I see doing it, then they start to do more and more. It really kind of opens up a different world of woodworking.
It's hard to go back.
Which is...
I don't know if I'll ever be able to build a piece that's just plain quarter sawn white oak.
Wow.
It would be difficult to do just a simple plain piece because most of my stuff has quite a lot of contrast in it. Just about all of the recent work doing the mechanical puzzle pieces, there's a lot of contrast and a lot of burl and figure. And it's something I've gotten used to. I tend to gravitate towards that now.
Very cool. So, obviously, veneer opens up a really broad range of woods to work with, different color palettes. I could see once you sort of tap into that, it would be really limiting to, like you said, just go back to a single wood and try to make something out of it.
It might be a nice change, though. Solid wood, no veneer, one thing, that's it. It would be interesting, and occasionally there are pieces like that. But the majority of my work is, I think, because it's been seen as very decorative and a lot of high contrast. I think that's what people gravitate towards now with my work because that's all they really see.
Sure.
I don't really publicize the pieces that aren't like that. Even on my website, I'm very particular about the pieces that I show. There's a lot more work that I've done that I just don't bother putting on the website either because I don't want to show that particular style, or I didn't end up taking professional pictures of the pieces. So that there's a very limited selection of work that I want to actually display.
Interesting.
And mostly, it's work that, and that's a thing for anybody in business. It's work that I want to do. That's the only work that I'm showing.
Sure. Yeah, I've seen the typical portfolio of a aspiring woodworker tends to have everything in it they've ever made since 8th grade. And I find, like you said, that the more you get involved, the more you sort of curate that down to, this isn't all the stuff I've made, but this is the stuff I would like to make going forward.
Yeah, and I started that way just like everybody else. My initial website had everything because at the beginning you don't have enough pieces to put in a portfolio, so everything needs to be in a portfolio.
Yes.
I've built 5 pieces of furniture. They're all going to the portfolio.
Yes, that's
just
right.
So I could say I've built more than one thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, at a certain point you get to a level where you are very clear about the kind, well, at least I do. I've gotten to the point where I'm very clear on the kind of work I want to do. And looking at your portfolio, it seems very similar. You have a very, very particular style, and that I would imagine is the work you want to be doing. You're not doing that because it pays better. You're not doing it because of any other reason. That's the work you enjoy doing.
Yes. No, it pays nothing at all. So yes, that is what I want.
Then you better be enjoying it.
Yeah, that's the key. Actually, speaking of that, you're of kind of a really, really small sort of breed of woodworkers where you're actually making a living as a woodworker, although a lot of people in the craft, starting out or otherwise, we sort of aspire to kind of become a pro, but not everybody makes it.
Don't do it.
You just answered my question. So what advice? So I'm like, hey, Craig, I really like woodworking. I just jumped into it. I've been doing it a couple years. I really hate my job as a high-paid accountant, and I want to do this full-time. How do I go about doing that? And
just stockpile as much money as you can. Buy all of your tools while you have a real job.
Yeah.
It's not an easy jump from, like you say, a high-paying accountant, executive, doctor, engineer to a woodworker because the pay scale drops dramatically, no matter what you're doing.
Okay.
The work I'm doing now is much higher end price-wise than the work I was doing even 5 years ago, and that's been a continual growth over many years. You're not going to drop your accounting job and then walk in and make $100,000 a year. Or maybe $50,000 a year, or you might make even less than that. Sure. If you're lucky, you make $50,000 a year, and that would probably take 60, 70 hours a week the entire year to do that. It's not something I would suggest somebody doing, honestly. If you don't like your day job, find a different day job that you do like that still pays. being self-employed is totally different than having a real job. It's much more of a challenge when it comes to paying the bills. It's not the same as just having to go to work every day. It requires somebody that can self-motivate
Mm-hmm.
and get up and go to work when you're sick, when you don't feel good, when it's sunny outside. You don't have the option of not going to work, whether you feel like it or not. And that isn't necessarily something that everyone can do. I know some self-employed woodworkers that I think they spend more time on vacation than they do actually woodworking, and it shows in the productivity and the income and the quality of the work. So for me, I mean, I came from an engineering background, but at the time I had bought most of the tools that I needed while I was doing engineering.
Okay.
And we had built a shop behind the house while I was doing engineering. But the first 5 years there were a significant struggle financially, because it just takes a long time to build up any sort of clientele.
Sure.
I mean, it depends on the kind of work you do. I know there are a lot of people that do, smaller items, cutting boards, little boxes, stuff like that. I just don't know how you can make money doing that, because there's so much competition from everybody with a garage shop
Sure.
that can make a jewelry box and only wants to sell it for $50.
Cool. Do you want to talk or can talk a little bit about the type of work you're doing in terms of the basic clientele? Again, when we come into it, like you said, I want to make a living doing the Nakashima live edge table or Krenov case on stand, thinking those types of commissions are going to fill the books for you. But you tend to have, it sounds like you're doing a broader variety than just doing sort of standalone pieces of furniture right now.
There's a mix of work even now, again, and I show some of it and I talk about some of the other stuff, but I don't show it. I do occasional work on yacht renovations here in San Diego, and I've been doing that for 10 years. And that's sort of supplemental income. It's all woodwork.
Sure.
It's cabinetry, and it's veneering, and it's veneer repair and things like that. But that, again, is work that I don't publicize because it's not necessarily the work I want to be doing.
Sure.
And at this point, I'm doing it more to help the person I work with, as opposed to because I need to.
Okay.
The majority of my work right now is freestanding furniture. I would say 95% is freestanding furniture at this point.
Oh, cool. Okay. So speaking of freestanding furniture and sort of contemporary work you're doing, the things I'm really struck by, I don't know what you call it. I'm sort of referring to it as the mechanical furniture you're making, where things open up, there's hidden doors, there's secret buttons. That looks like a blast, and I can't imagine that's, I mean, it seems like you're having a lot of fun doing that. How did you get into that? Is that stuff you just said, well, I'm doing all this other stuff, but man, I like hidden drawers. I'm going to start doing this stuff too. And is that the type of stuff that you're doing like for commission work right now?
Yeah, all of that is commission work because it's quite honestly too expensive to do as speculation.
Okay.
There's too much time and too much material cost. I started doing that with the piece I call the automaton table, which was for a local client.
Okay.
I showed him the initial Röntgen videos that I had been looking at, David and Abraham Röntgen from the Met, like 7 or 8 years ago.
Yep.
And he was excited and he wanted to do a piece, but he wanted something small and Art Deco in style. So, but moving. So we did a piece, the first mechanical piece I did, which is very, very simple in comparison to any of the Röntgen stuff. Mm-hmm. But it's, it opens, you press down on the top and it rises up and a drawer comes out and a tray folds down. And then there's some little hidden drawers in it. Very minimal, but then you press down and everything closes back up automatically. That was the first mechanical piece I did, and it was 7 or 8 years ago now. And that has led to every other mechanical piece I've done. I did a video of it moving, posted on YouTube.
Yeah.
It got picked up by a couple of these puzzling groups, and it got picked up by a few blogs, and it just sort of went wildfire and went everywhere.
Wow.
And each of the pieces that I've done since then, the person has seen that piece at some point in the past.
Oh, cool. Do you worry about getting pegged as, he's that moving furniture secret compartment guy, or is that like a pretty cool thing?
I'm kind of okay with that. To be honest with you, in the sense that freestanding furniture is the majority of what I'm doing, mechanical / puzzle furniture is the majority of that work now.
Awesome.
I mean, there's occasionally pieces like the Mother Pearl desk from a couple months ago that get kind of thrown in along the way in between the mechanical pieces. But for me, the majority of what I'm doing is this mechanical work. It's puzzles and mechanical movement, or the piece I just finished is going to guitar. That's just mechanical movement, no puzzles.
Wow.
4 little buttons, and each button moves something as you push it. There's watch winders and jewelry drawers and stuff that pops out, or a lid opens and there's storage trays underneath it. That's actually the kind of work I want to be doing. And there really just aren't very many people doing it. There's a very, very small number, probably count them on less than one hand, that are building mechanically moving pieces of furniture.
Wow.
So it's a tiny, tiny market.
That's really cool. And I mean, I imagine just that kind of mechanical aspect of it, the engineering that goes into the piece, is a huge challenge in and of itself. But you're also combining just really fantastic veneering and marquetry and woodworking along with that, to where it seems like you sort of had to spend your career getting really, really good at all the aspects of woodworking before you started to introduce some mechanical parts as well. It would be tough to, as a person, say, oh yeah, I want to make that kind of furniture, and then have to start from scratch and learn all those skills.
Yeah, I would agree. You'd have to be pretty good at making furniture in order to do the mechanical work that's required.
Yeah.
Because these pieces have such tight tolerances, you need to be pretty precise in your work. And because they have such tight tolerances, wood movement is a huge issue. So really everything is veneered to try and minimize wood movement. So you kind of have to know veneering as well.
Cool.
So you'd have to have some mechanical knowledge, some fabrication of furniture knowledge, some veneering knowledge. For me, the goal on these pieces is to make them look like furniture first, and then have the added details of they have puzzles, they have mechanical movement. But just walking by it in a room, it's just a nice piece of furniture.
Yes.
They don't always come out that way. It depends on the client's needs or desire for the piece. Some of them look kind of a little odd as furniture, but some of them look like a nice freestanding piece of furniture.
I see. Very, very cool. One thing I wanted to ask you about, and that's, we talked about, okay, if I'm going to shift career, say from an accountant or established career into woodworking, that's kind of one scenario. I think a more common scenario today is a lot of young folks are either, instead of going to college or right out of college, really sort of wanting to take that path. And a lot of people are saying, what school should I go to? What kind of education do I need? What is a path into this craft? So if you're talking to someone who doesn't already have a day job they don't like, but they're thinking about getting into woodworking as a career, what's your advice to those guys and girls?
Well, they have advantages over the accountant with a house, a wife, 2 kids, car payments, and everything else. And that's the real reason to not just jump from a high-paying executive job to a self-employed job, is you have all the baggage financially that goes along with getting to that point. Somebody that's just starting out, coming out of high school, maybe going into a trade school, doesn't have any of that baggage, maybe even still lives at home. They can spend years learning the craft, either taking classes at community colleges or taking a more intensive one-on-one class, and develop their skills before they get to the point where they have to actually start producing income.
Okay.
That makes it so much easier. And that's like having a day job and doing it in the evening and the weekends. You spend years building up your skills before you'll be at the point where you can actually go and do that for a living, where somebody that doesn't have the day job can spend all day, every day practicing and get much better, much faster.
Very cool. And speaking of that, I don't think you've done any teaching or a lot of teaching. Is that something you've done or aspire to do?
No, so far I've said no to every teaching offer that's come in. It isn't something that I can justify financially because I have the financial baggage.
Right.
I'm supporting a family of 4 on this one income. There isn't a lot of time to spend traveling and coming up with lesson plans and doing the work that I haven't done already for teaching.
Right.
Having never taught before, it would take quite a bit of effort to get started and develop a plan for a good class, and then the time involved in doing that I just can't justify financially, unfortunately.
Right.
I'd like to teach at some point. At the moment, and for the past maybe, I think it's been 10 years now writing for you guys, that's kind of my way of teaching. The book on veneering is a way of teaching. It's as close as I'm going to get to kind of sharing whatever knowledge I have. It's by writing articles. It's by, doing podcasts and talking about it. It's by writing the book. But one-on-one teaching is not something I see in my near future.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually, you kind of jumped right into my next question, because I wanted to talk about the book that you just wrote, sort of the reasons behind you writing it. And obviously, it's a tremendous textbook, probably the best textbook I know right now on, the basics of veneering and marquetry. And I assume, having sort of written a book myself recently, that it's a huge undertaking. And with your busy schedule, I was just sort of wondering, what was your inspiration for wanting to write a book, and how did you find the time to do that?
It became my evening and weekend job.
Yeah.
Outside of my day job. I did all the writing in the evenings and weekends, shot photos during the day in between working on projects. As for why I did it, it was sort of the next step from writing articles, I thought, to sort of compile all of that information. Not all the information is really applicable to writing a magazine article.
Sure.
Some of the topics have been covered by other people. Some of them just don't appeal to the magazines. So it was the best way to kind of combine all that information into one spot and take as much of the things I have learned over the past 20 years as I could and sort of cram them into one location.
Cool.
And it definitely was intended to cover a wide range of skill sets, from very, very basic to, some advanced stuff for people that have been doing veneering for a while, but maybe don't do marquetry and parquetry, or don't do curved veneering and bent laminations. So it was meant to appeal to really anybody that wanted to do anything in veneering.
That's really cool. And I mean, first off, I just want to say thanks, because it's a huge effort, and communicating and compiling that body of knowledge into, like you said, one place, one book. That's really neat, because you're not doing things or writing books that have been written, 100 ways in the past, and you're putting your spin on it. You're really sort of kind of creating and assembling a body of knowledge that really didn't exist before, and now it does. Is this cool book, and it's going to benefit and influence tons and tons of people from here on out. So anyway, thanks.
I hope so.
Thanks very much for writing. I know you're not getting rich doing it, but
oh yeah, the checks are just rolling in. You know it.
Are they?
And you're selling like 10 times as many copies as I am, so you're getting that many more checks.
Yes, I'm getting like $10 in a check instead of $1. So there you go.
I'm still waiting for the first check, but. Yeah. In terms of the knowledge that's in the book, the closest thing in my mind is the William Lincoln book on veneering from late 80s.
Okay.
And it had machinery from that time period. It's black and white. It was an extensive textbook on veneering. It had so much more information even than what's in my book. What I did, I thought, was take the same concept of kind of a textbook on veneering, but simplify it to the point that there isn't a lot of extra fluff in there for, here's how it was done in the 1800s, yes. Or here's how you would do it if you had a big factory. It's there's, in the way I kind of talked about glues and substrates, you can glue veneer with basically anything. So whatever glue you have in your garage, you can attach a piece of veneer to something with that. And that was sort of how I wanted to present that, is there's no technical stumbling block at the beginning to getting started. You just need some veneer and some glue, and you can start veneering, and then just go from there into the next chapter and the next chapter. And I wanted people to realize it's not technically daunting to get starting in veneering. It's a very simple process once you get just the very basic skills required, under your belt.
Very cool. So I'm a solid wood furniture maker for one reason, that I'm afraid if I started getting into veneering, I would just lose myself in there. But that said, so I'm doing solid wood work. I'm looking at your book. There's some really cool stuff. What's your advice for someone such as myself who said, okay, I kind of want to dip my toe in this. How do I start to combine veneered elements in solid wood furniture? Do you have any strategies for that or advice?
First thing before you do anything else is go buy my book.
Okay, got it.
The easiest way is to do simple stuff, like the first couple projects in the book. We're covering, a single piece of veneer for a door panel, or a book match piece of veneer for a box top, or a
Okay.
4-way book match piece of burl for a box. Just incorporate a single panel of veneer into whatever you're building.
Okay.
If you're building, if you're building chairs, a backsplat can be veneered and stuck in place very easily. If you're doing boxes, you can just veneer a top panel, and single piece of veneer, you can clamp it with clamps. You don't need a vacuum press. You don't need fancy glues. You don't need any extra equipment than what you already have to just incorporate that. Door panels, the same thing. You can do, figured veneer, decorative door panels very easily. It's just a flat panel and incorporate it in a traditional frame and panel door, and you've got something interesting that's maybe a little bit more visually complex than, a single piece of wood panel for a door.
Right. Very cool. The other part of your book, as I got into it, and I'm familiar with some of your work where you've incorporated it, is to do sort of more the pictorial marquetry inlay and stuff, where you'll have a piece with large door panels and you'll have sort of like a flowering branch, flowing across both pieces. And when I see something like that, I mean, that is like, oh, that's cool. I kind of want to do that. When did you start with straight up veneering and then sort of get into marquetry later on? I saw in your book that you'd mentioned you'd studied with Paul Schurch for a while,
Yep.
who's a master there. Was that sort of, and I think that was you mentioned that was like 2005. Was that your first foray into that, or had you been working in marquetry prior to that as well?
No, I had been doing veneering for a few years before that, but I saw Paul's work at the Design and Wood Show here in San Diego, and I wanted to start incorporating floral marquetry specifically into my work. So I did take a class with him up in Santa Barbara in 2005, and then I took another class with Patrick Edwards here in town.
Oh, wow.
In 2006, I believe, a week with each of them.
Wow.
My work definitely follows the Paul Schurch method of modern glues, modern materials. So for me, it was a way to add some visual complexity to my work. And my initial marquetry pieces were very, very simple in comparison to what I'm doing now. They were, one single branch of dogwood flowers with 3 or 4 flowers going across a stretcher or going across the face of a small drawer or something like that.
Uh-huh.
It's sort of the same idea as the veneering. You could incorporate it in a very minimal way.
Yeah.
Some of the simple veneer I show in the book is, if you do a veneered drawer bottom, you just cut a single flower in the drawer bottom. So when somebody opens a drawer, they see a nice decorative marquetry flower inside the drawer. It's just one flower,
Very cool.
easy to cut, doesn't take very long. And if it doesn't work out, it's not the top of the desk and you
Yes.
somehow ruined it.
I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a drawer bottom. If it doesn't work out, you just put another layer of veneer over it.
Cool.
And, cover it up. But you can incorporate marquetry in the same way where it's, very simple to start and then just sort of build on those skills, because it does take time to learn how to cut marquetry and to learn how to shade it properly. It's a skill like any other. The more you make, the better you're going to get at it.
Very cool. Very cool. I think personally, I like the idea of a drawer bottom. I also like the idea of the bottom of a drawer bottom first. I think I'm going to start there. So no one's ever going to see that ever unless you're like moving furniture.
Well, that's one of the first places I used parquetry. I think it was Lewis cubes. I did inside that automaton cabinet. I did the bottom of one of the tiny little drawers. It was visible when you pull out the drawer because there was a mirrored polished stainless steel plate underneath it. So you'd see the parquetry as you open the drawer.
Wild.
But it was, same sort of thing. It was a good place to incorporate something where the client will find it, but everybody else doesn't know it's there.
Right. Very, very cool. So is this your first and last book, or do you have ideas for other books you might want to be writing?
No, we've been talking about a second book for ever since the first one was done, actually.
Oh, good, good.
The hesitation is to see how well the first one sells and see whether or not I'm a good enough author for them to want to do a second book with me.
Okay. Well, it looks like it's selling well, and from reading the book, you're definitely a fantastic author. So
Thank you.
Can you tell me what that second foray into the print world might be?
I think I can. It's going to be on Inlay.
Cool.
Sort of the same concept as the Veneering book, but applied to Inlay. So covering very basic inlay, just doing, a perimeter around a tabletop, like a straight line of ebony or something, through, butterflies, mother of pearl, some of the more exotic materials that I use in Inlay, some of the flexible mother of pearl, and then, even some more historic inlay, line and berry stuff. It's sort of meant to do the same thing where if you want to do some inlay, you can start with a really simple project, or if you've been doing it for a while, you can flip to the end of the book and look at something much more complex, or maybe using a material that you didn't realize existed that can be used for inlay to make something extra colorful or extra decorative.
Wow, that sounds really cool. In fact, you've written a fairly recent articles with us where you're using some really interesting kind of manufactured materials for inlay.
Yep, Zipflex, the flexible mother of pearl.
I think that the biggest challenge for me would be the more exotic the materials get. I guess it comes down to how can you sort of, tastefully incorporate these really wild visual elements into a piece. And that's something you do really, really well. I mean, you work with some really amazing stuff, but I also get a sense it's a very strong restraint from design standpoint from your work. I never see anything getting like really out of control. Can you talk about just sort of, that whole design process for you? Because I think the more variables you introduce, I think the more difficult it gets. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it can certainly be overdone or taken to a level where you would expect it to be on a guitar, because a lot of the inlay work done on guitars is, amazingly complex.
Sure.
Real pictorial pieces, but they're spread over a very small surface area. The majority of them, mother of pearl, the flexible mother of pearl especially that I've used, is to do perimeter lines around dining tables or decorative lines in backsplats. I'm not doing a lot of complex swirls and patterns in the inlay. They're just essentially straight lines, typically combined with something like ebony to give a little bit of flash to a piece. It's a nicely veneered tabletop. It's got an ebony border, but then there's this nice, interesting, fine white line going around it that grabs your attention, or it kind of flashes from across the room a little bit. I want the inlay in the same way that I want the furniture with the puzzle-oriented stuff to be nice furniture, elegant furniture first, and then add just a little bit of inlay to sort of push it one level higher, but not so much that you push it to the point of it being extravagant or so decorative that it no longer has the visual appeal that you were hoping for. Some of the materials I'm using, amylite is one in particular that's a difficult material to use. It's very expensive. I used it on a desk and a matching chair a few years ago, and it was inlaid as corner fans, like one-quarter fans in the corners.
Oh, cool.
But because the material is blue and green and red, it's just got a wide variety of colors. I used it in very small places.
Okay. In
small pieces, just little decorative details here and there. Where if you had done it, in the center of a table and made it more extravagant, it would sort of ruin the effect, I think, because it's so much more color and it's so much more visual complexity that wasn't necessary.
Got it. Right. So treat it like a really powerful spice where just a little is going to enhance a dish. Too much is going to throw things off just a bit.
Yeah. And you see that a lot in, I don't think they're, maybe spice boxes, but people that have not necessarily really studied the spice box, the Pennsylvania spice box with the banding and the decorative inlay, you can see the ones that are done in a very refined way, and then occasionally you'll see one where someone has just completely covered the entire box with inlay or with decorative banding, and it really just sort of screams at you, hey, look at me, look at me.
Yes. Do you think
that's not the look we're going for?
No. Do you think that? I think my first thing, it would probably be that too much thing, and maybe you just have to get that wild one out of your system, and then you can sort of back off a little bit. I don't know. Do you have pieces?
Well, and some of this stuff is fairly expensive. The amylite is about $100 a square inch, so you don't really want to use a lot of it if you can avoid it.
Yes.
For me, that the closest thing I've got to sort of an extravagant piece is the mother of pearl desk I just finished.
Okay.
Where the entire desk is covered in mother of pearl, and then it's banded in a line of just black ebony.
Wow.
1/8-inch black ebony all around every piece of mother of pearl around the perimeter. The whole thing is banded in ebony, wow. and then it got a high gloss polished finish on top of that. Wow. So it's extravagant. It's for a client that's extravagant though, so it's for someone who wanted a piece that was extravagant. It wasn't just to make something really, wild and crazy.
Got it.
But you could do that with, a little tiny box, just cover it with inlay.
Not that expensive stuff, though. Otherwise, it'd be a really small box, I
Well,
think.
there isn't a lot available in that anyways, so
Is that a natural material?
it is. It's made from petrified mollusk shells, I believe.
Wow.
Either petrified or I can't remember the exact description of it. They're primarily found in Canada, and they're big, essentially big. What's the word I'm looking for? Big snails.
Okay.
Big snail shells.
Huh.
2 feet across, and
Wow.
these are just little sections of the shell that have changed color over time as the age has hit them. So they're very delicate. It's very flaky material. It's sliced into veneer, and then it's glued to a backer,
Okay.
and then covered with a clear layer of essentially plastic.
Just
the material is sandwiched between 2 other layers.
Got it. Very cool. Hey, a really quick aside, because Ben held up a sign because he wanted to know where he can get a signed copy of your book other than showing up on your doorstep with a book and a pen.
You can go to my website, and there is a banner right at the top that says buy a signed copy of my book.
Cool.
It goes straight to PayPal, very simple process. I learned that from somebody named Mike Pekovich, who did a very similar process, but I simplified mine even further. It just goes right to PayPal.
Oh.
You don't have to enter any information, just click a button and go.
What?
But signed copies, I took what you did and I simplified it. So there.
Okay, we have to talk some more off the air. I need to get that going.
Start off by getting yourself a good web guy, and then ask him to do it.
Hey, Ben. So what is your website?
ctfinefurniture.com.
Cool. Okay. So
And it's signed. There's signed copies are available. It's in the video banner up at the top. You can just click on it. It takes you right to PayPal. Shipping is included in the PayPal checkout. So it's a simple process, and it's a nice way to sell books to people that are interested in having a signed copy.
Yeah, I think that's a really cool thing. I certainly want a signed copy. I do have a copy in front of me, no signature. So
I don't remember seeing your order come in. I'm sorry.
how about a trade?
There we go.
Okay. So, well, you live in San Diego area. Did you grow up in that area?
No, I grew up in California, Northern California.
Okay.
Up way north. But we've been in San Diego for 25-ish years now.
Okay. Do you think that again, that specific locale of where you're at as a woodworker, did all your clientele come specifically from the area that you're working? And how important is that if I want to make a living, that I move to a place where there are people who are interested in buying stuff from me?
It probably helps at the beginning. It doesn't help now. The majority of my work now is shipping out of the country.
Okay.
Or to the East Coast, it seems like. I haven't built a piece for somebody in San Diego for a few years now. So now it doesn't matter at all. I could be anywhere. But in the beginning, it helped to be close to shows. Like the Design and Wood show, it was very convenient having it in town and having a place where you could show your work once a year to a very, very large audience.
Yes.
So you can ship pieces to that show if you've got the money to pay for that. But if you're in a location that has a show like that, it's very convenient and very helpful at the beginning. But I don't think you need to be in a high rent area like San Diego. It probably actually would be counterproductive to be in a place like San Diego at the beginning because the cost of living is so high. You'd be better off in the country somewhere where you don't have high rents, you don't have high bills for everything else, and you can just focus on the work and not worry quite so much about whether you're going to make enough money to pay rent this month.
Sure.
As long as you're willing to travel to shows and get your work seen, it probably doesn't matter where you live.
Okay, so I was going to say, how important is it to get to shows? Because you mentioned the one in San Diego, which is pretty big. Do you are you finding clientele through those places? Are you just sort of spreading the word about your work? How many shows are you doing like a year right now?
None.
Okay. Just because
so at the moment I'm not finding any clients through the shows.
Okay.
But in the past, that is how I started getting noticed.
Okay.
I put pieces in the Design and Wood show, the Artistry and Wood show up in Sonoma, a couple times in the Orange County show, and then I shipped pieces to other shows a few times, but that gets to be so expensive it's not really worth the payout for it.
Okay.
But for me at the beginning, it was very, very important because it allowed me to make showpieces that weren't commissioned, speculative showpieces, and then have a place to actually show them off.
Got it.
And that generated a lot of work in the beginning. It generated marquetry, Art Deco, really complex veneered pieces were generated by people seeing other work I had displayed in a show. So if you're just starting out, it's definitely a place to look at getting your work seen by a much bigger audience than would see it if it was on your website or, posted on Instagram or something like that. You get people walking into a show who are probably more inclined to actually buy something.
Got it. Okay.
Because they're seeing it at a show and they're there for that particular reason.
Okay. So early on, it sounded like you were trying to hit as many shows as you could once you got going. And then it sounds like you were scaling it back a little bit, maybe once the work was coming in on a more regular basis. That
and the work now is not really suitable for the shows. It's too expensive and it's too complex.
Okay.
For me to be willing to front the cost of getting something to a show. All these pieces end up being moved by movers now. So there's cost involved in shipping them. I don't just put them in the back of my truck anymore. And then there's the liability of having them at a show where a bunch of people are going to be touching them and playing with them.
Yeah.
And some of the clients now don't really want their pieces displayed that way. These are intended. A lot of the clients haven't actually seen the piece when it's finished yet. So they want to be the first one to play with it. They don't want it to go to a show where 1,000 people play with it before they ever get to touch it.
Right. So, kind of in terms of marketing, you're on Instagram. You have a really cool feed, which is CT Fine Furniture.
Yep.
Cool. How important is that? What effect does that have? Is it important for any person trying to make a career as a furniture maker? Do they need to have an Instagram account, a Facebook account? What are the benefits, if any, do you see about stopping and spending the time to take a picture and post it every day?
Well, there definitely are benefits if you're just getting started. And I suppose there are benefits for somebody that's far along in their career as well to be able to share what they're doing, maybe share techniques or share sort of inspirational pieces that they've built for other people to see. But at the beginning, no, it's not necessary. If you have a way of selling work without it, you're going to have a lot more time in the shop if you're not spending time on social media. But in today's world, it seems to be almost a requirement as a way to showcase your work to, a much wider audience. It's the next best thing to having your pieces in a gallery is putting them on Instagram because anybody in the world could see it. It's not limited to just the people, unless you have a private account. It's not limited to just the people you know or just the people you've told about it. It can get picked up and shared and reposted, all around the world. And you might find a client coming from some other country who would never have seen your work if it wasn't posted on social media.
Right.
And the same goes for like techniques. There are a lot of guys that showcase just a ton of interesting techniques, and they're willing to share them and kind of put themselves out there on Instagram to share this information with people, and there's where they may not have any other way to share that information. Either they're not writing articles or they're not writing books. This is the next best way to share technical information as well. As long as you know who you're getting the technical information from and, it's a good source and it's somebody that, seems to really know what they're doing safety-wise and everything else.
Right. Yeah. The thing I like about it is I've seen finished pieces of your work, and it's really stunning. I mean, it's incredibly intimidating to look at. You wonder how that even got made, and I like how when you're posting sort of the process shots on Instagram and you're figuring out some of the mechanics, or you're, working on the veneer or the construction, it really kind of demystifies the whole process for me a little bit, and I think that's a really cool thing. I think that's, I think that's a great thing. To see the work you're doing, to see things like Tim Coleman, who's a great designer, to watch him sort of kind of work through the design of a process of leather, a lot of other really, really good woodworkers. So I think that's neat. I mean, certainly we're not, I don't know. I don't think there's a direct benefit, but I think it's really cool that you're taking the time and so many people are taking the time just to document what they're making because, I don't know, I think it's it kind of advances the craft as a whole. I think that's kind of a cool thing.
Yeah, and that's perfect. And it allows people to see work that maybe they wouldn't have seen any other way. Like Tim Cullen in particular, there's almost no way to see his work in person unless you go to the gallery back east where he shows it.
Right.
Or you go to the New Hampshire Furniture Masters show. There's no way for somebody to see his work on the West Coast except through pictures like that.
Yeah.
And to be able to see his process, instead of just seeing the, like you said, the finished pictures on his website, you get to see the process of how he develops some of these pieces. And it's really interesting to kind of see the backstory of how he comes up with some of these extra curved designs, or how he does his layered marquetry. It's information that you wouldn't get unless it just happened to be in a magazine article, or it happened to be, he's teaching a class in your neighborhood. You'd never get that information any other way if he didn't post it all somewhere and wasn't willing to share it.
Right. And speaking of Tim, I mean, there's like woodworkers all around the world who are doing crazy stuff, really inspiring stuff. Are you sort of influenced or inspired by some of the stuff you've seen through social media that you, like you said, you never would have seen it and maybe wouldn't have considered work like that? Or are you pretty much locked into what you want to be doing?
Oh, no, I see stuff all the time that, where were these people? How do I not know that these people exist? I mean, constantly, not necessarily just in furniture, though, in a whole variety of other ways. Knife makers especially, there's just phenomenal work being done by knife makers now. The engraving and the complex mechanisms, it's just astonishing, some of the work. But I keep finding new things. I don't look when I look through Instagram, I don't really look through the woodworking as much anymore. I look at other stuff, ceramics, knife makers, pottery, things like that. It's more interesting for me because I'm not exposed to those fields on a regular basis to kind of get a glimpse into them and see work that I've never seen before.
Very cool. Yeah, cool stuff. Go ahead.
I was just going to say that, that's another thing that just wouldn't have been possible without some other way of getting to that information. You could buy books on pottery at the bookstore, but it's not quite the same as being able to flip through somebody's entire portfolio and see the inside of their shop and see how they work. And, it just gives you so much more access than you would have had otherwise.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Since we're sort of devolved to the point where we're discussing Instagram,
that's your fault.
Maybe that's
you brought it up.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, that is my fault. Maybe that's a good place to wrap things up. And I want to thank you again for making the time just to talk to me. I mean, that was cool. I like this. I don't care if anybody else liked this, but also for writing the book and writing the articles and just being, really generous with your knowledge and the information you want to throw out there, because it definitely is helping a lot of us and the craft as a whole. Really, really cool stuff. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Mike. And it was a pleasure talking to you in person once.
Okay.
For the first time.
And we got to get together off the air about this whole PayPal thing in the books.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot, Craig. Take care.
Okay. Take care.
All right, since Mike didn't do it, I'll sign off. Thank you for listening to this episode of Shop Talk Live. If you want us to answer your question on the show, you can send that into shoptalk@taunton.com. And to see any links that were discussed in this episode, head on over to shoptalklive.com for the show notes. If you enjoy this podcast and you feel like you get a lot from it, I'm not going to ask for your money. I'm going to ask that you check out finewoodworking.com's unlimited membership, or you subscribe to Fine Woodworking magazine. That's what pays the bills around here, and that's what affords us the ability to make this podcast. We really enjoy making this podcast. We enjoy reaching out to the listeners on a personal level, and we feel like this is a great community builder for us. And if you want to help us keep doing that, sign up for an unlimited membership or sign up for a subscription. Either way, you're not going to be just helping us make this podcast. You're going to be getting the best woodworking content that money can buy. Whether you're a beginner looking to get inspired or an expert looking for your next challenge, you're going to find it in the pages of Fine Woodworking magazine or online at finewoodworking.com. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.
Your book's more expensive. A hardcover.
Actually, on Amazon, mine is discounted more, so your book is actually the more expensive book. So I think that says something about the relative values of the books.
Oh, wow.